more men are giving up on college. Women now make up, in the United States, 60% of all enrollments. Now think about that. Only 40% of new college students are male. 60% are female. Can you imagine what kind of a controversy, what kind of a crisis we'd be in if those numbers were flipped? With universities firmly under the spiked heel of hypocritical feminists, don't expect any of this to change anytime soon. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello everyone and welcome to The Dr. Duke Show. We are that one and only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today's show is sponsored by Mike Lindell and our friends at MyPillow. You can save up to 66% on all merchandise just by using the access code Dr. Duke, D-R-D-U-K-E. Again, 66% on MyPillow just by using the entry code Dr. Duke. So type that name out, D-R-D-U-K-E, and save some serious cash. Okay, today we start in the world of higher education, and we got to stop using the word higher unless it's in the phrase, in the meaning of stoned, right? Because there's nothing higher about this. A new study shows that a major shift in the number of men choosing not to go to college anymore. We would call this a crisis in any other demographic. If this were happening to black women or Asian men or Jewish people, if it were happening to gays or lesbians or Nigerian transfer students, the world would be coming to an end. But it's white men primarily who are not going to college, and that's a staggering, disproportionate number. 60% of all undergraduate enrollments are actually women. That's a very, very serious change in enrollment, and it is one that we would call a lack of equity. If they use the word equity correctly, it would require affirmative action if they use the term affirmative correctly. But because they are white men who are responsible for all the world's evils, because you have so much feminism and this Me Too garbage that runs universities now. Now you've got the social justice warriors, the posturers. You've got the critical race theorists now who blame every evil in the world on white men in particular. And let's be clear, we're talking about men who are cisgendered, white, and usually Christian. And so that's another question I'd like to see if they broke this down a little bit. Is it primarily, of that 40% of men who are going to college, what percent of the 40 are gay or trans? Because I'll bet you after you sort that out, the number of cisgendered white Christian men, for lack of a better term, is much lower even still.
So it's the Wall Street Journal reporting this, and they had an article headlined, "A Generation of American Men Give Up on College. I Just Feel Lost." So they reported this widening education gap, and it's at 2-year and 4-year colleges and universities. If there's anywhere that I guess the white men are going, it would be to the trade schools, to the technical colleges.
Yep.
And then I would say, okay, maybe just to the 2-year to get like an associate's degree, maybe just do something, but it's across the board. So at the close of this last year, women made up 59.5% of college students, so 60%, which is an all-time high, as we know, and men, that other 40.5%. And that's according to enrollment data that came out of the National Student Clearinghouse, which is a nonprofit research group. And U.S. colleges and universities had 1.5 million fewer students compared with 5 years ago. And then the men accounted for 71% of that decline. So if you just want to look at the broad scope of things, we have 1.5 million fewer students. But then let's take a look at it. And yeah, it's the men who were saying, "Peace out, Girl Scout. I'm not doing this."
Yeah, and I've said to you many times, this is anecdotal, of course, but I've been a professor for almost 30 years. I have never, ever, ever encountered any complaining student, any Title IX garbage from male students. I mean, it's always female students. It's the female students who are by far the most intolerant. Even when I've had very aggressive and very vocal men who were radical liberals, they either dropped the class, did the mature thing, right? Why sit here? Or they argued. They would argue, and I would give them space, right? Go ahead and argue. Yeah, and they did it. I had a really out there socialist. I think I mentioned him in my interim class back in May. He was one of the most shallow, belligerent socialist kids I've ever had. But he didn't drop the class. So I respected him for us. And he argued. Once or twice a class, he would argue and made just cringeworthy statements. I mentioned he defended Stalin against, he may have killed a lot of people, but what he did was just. Talked about the Ukraine, which killed this Stalin starving of the millions of people in the Ukraine. He said he denied it. It was absolutely cringeworthy, but he sat there and fought. When I encounter very liberal women, they run away sometimes, or they get madder and madder until they run over and report you and try to get you fired. There's a significant difference in how what we're doing with this power imbalance. We're not making women smarter. We don't seem to be making them more independent. We're not making them more critical thinkers. With these great big gaps and justifying these gaps by arguing that white men are all your problem, we're making them entitled, we're making them lazy, we're making them vindictive. That's all I'm seeing here with this great big bump in female enrollments. I'm not seeing a whole lot of, wow, aren't we turning out accomplished women? Or turning out children is what we're turning out.
All right. Well, if you take a look at not just, at the close of the year, what was the enrollment data, let's actually look at the graduation rates too. There is a divergence across that too. So after 6 years of college, 65% of women in the U.S. who started their four-year university in 2012 had received diplomas by 2018, compared with 59% of men during the same period. I love that it's 6 years of college. That's the most, but I was like, wait.
That's the norm now.
It's not a four-year degree. It's not a five-year degree. So, according to this report too, in the next few years, 2 women will earn a college degree for every man if this trend continues. And that's said by Douglas Shapiro, the executive director of the research center at the National Student Clearinghouse.
And that's even more damning because it's twice as many women. It's not 60% anymore. In a few years, we're going to be at twice as many women are going to college. And that what happens there, if it were twice as many white men in colleges, we would be doing everything we could to absolutely crush or to remake white men. Toxic masculinity courses, right? All of this other garbage. But because it's women, no one bats an eye. And as long as they're particularly women of color, well, this is just fine. And so it does show you a very depressing aspect of what's going on in the world today. Just in the news today, I didn't even have time to update the story for it. A similar study just came out in the UK, and it's exactly right. The same thing's happening in England and Britain, Great Britain. Every single demographic in British college life went up. Every single ethnic group, Asian men and women skyrocketed. The only demographic that had a 10% drop off was, again, white men.
Before we move on, just a quick reminder that the best way to access our content is to download our Freedom Project Media app. Simply search Freedom Project in your app store and make sure you allow for notifications. Also, if you like listening to the audio podcast, we are available on Apple, Google, SoundCloud, and everywhere else. Now, you talked in the last segment about that toxic masculinity. Well, I think we found the solution. Woohoo! An actual study was done revealing that princess culture could be truly healing for humanity.
So
truly
forcing boys to study princesses, right, is what you're telling me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because having kids watch Disney princess content, it could mean they will have more progressive attitudes toward gender. Now, a study was done by developmental psychology researchers led by Brigham Young University professor Sarah Coyne. And they found that exposing children to Disney princesses may make them less likely to believe in traditional gender roles. And that's what Coyne calls hegemonic masculinity. As Coyne said, we looked at 2 different aspects of hegemonic masculinity, including opposition to egalitarian attitudes about women and a reluctance to, quote, show emotion in the context of interpersonal relationships. She and her team found that children who watched Disney princess content and played with related toys were less likely to believe in traditional gender roles. And she said that we're now seeing long-term positive effects of princess culture on how we think about gender. Princess culture has some really deep and beautiful things about womanhood and relationships. If we can grasp onto that, it can be truly healing for humanity.
These are the same idiots who 10 years ago told us how absolutely damning princess culture was to our little girls.
That is correct.
Remember?
And Disney is racist to begin with.
Yep, all of these fairy tales are indoctrinating girls into submission. All the Cinderella, all the Sleeping Beauty stuff, where young women who were disempowered could only be rescued by handsome, charming princes. Now, all of a sudden, the same, again, clown show professors have decided, oh, wait a second. Yeah, princess culture may be bad for women that way, but if we force boys to participate in women culture, princess culture, we'll do to the boys what we said was going to happen to the girls. We'll turn them into emotive, crying little children who are not hegemonic in their maleness, right? Who do see emotions in conversations as useful things. So see how quickly the pendulum swings here. 10 years ago, fairy tales were eviscerated on college campuses as being misogynist. Now, they're misandrist, and we're okay with that.
But there was another story I read where it said that now fathers are not allowed to call their daughters princesses. So maybe you can just call your son a princess.
You can have it both ways, right? The answer is going to be 10 years from now. We are, in the name of feminism, we ban princess movies from women, and we mandate them for boys. That's where we're heading down this road here. It'll turn the boys into girls, make them princess. Look, you raise a generation of boys only on fairy tales, princess fairy tales, the transgenders numbers are going to score, right? That's what happens. So that's the only answer here, right? The hypocrisy. How do we get around it? Ban it for girls because it's harmful, and that's the same reason why you have to mandate it for boys, because it's harmful.
Now, the research was done by having the participating parents and children fill out questionnaires designed to measure the child's attitude toward gender roles. They had children sort toys into categories based on how much they like to play with them. This study has been done a million times, by the way. Most of the kids were between the ages of 3 and 5 years old during the first iteration of the study, and then they came back to them about 5 years later to see, are you still playing with that same doll? Now, the study was actually funded by Brigham Young University as well, and a paper that they published in the Journal of Child Development was called, this is a long one, ready, Princess Power, longitudinal associations between engagement with princess culture in preschool and gender stereotypical behavior, body esteem, and hegemonic masculinity in early adolescence. It's a long one.
And it's funny. We assume that hegemonic masculinity exists, but don't little girls growing up in little girl culture, don't they have a female hegemonic? Isn't that, does it not exist? Do we pretend it does not exist?
I played with G.I. Joe, so I don't know what you're talking about.
It's interesting that only men and only white men are hegemonic anything. And so it seems to me that growing up little girls among other little girls is going to inevitably have and lead to a female hegemonic, right? And they've already said what it is. Emotionalism, right? It's good to be emotional in your conversations. Why? Because it's what little girls do. It's bad to not be emotionalistic because boys aren't doing what little girls are doing. So there's always this hypocrisy that we've seen in every story so far we've done this Young Week.
Now, as the paper actually states, adult men who prescribe to norms of hegemonic masculinity tend to show less egalitarian attitudes toward men and women. Individuals who strongly endorse hegemonic masculine norms are often less emotionally open and less adept at expressing emotions, affection, or confronting negative emotions in a healthy manner.
Yeah.
Now, if you've been to college, you know it costs a lot for a college degree in more ways than one. It costs more when you pay all of your money and then you actually don't graduate as well. A new report from American Council of Trustees and Alumni found that spending on student services, including diversity initiatives, may actually make campuses less diverse. I didn't see it happening. Such spending drives up the cost of attendance, thereby making college less accessible to underrepresented groups. Now, as the report states, increases in tuition have been linked to a decrease in student diversity in future years on public campuses, with a $1,000 increase in tuition and fees causing the racial and ethnic diversity of first-time, full-time freshmen to decline by 4.5 For institutions pledging millions to offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion, this statistic demands some attention. Now, while there is little evidence that employing executive-level diversity officers will grow diversity on campus, passing the cost of these hires on to students is overtly harmful. Say it ain't so.
So
you mean all those diversity officers with titles that are this long and do jobs that account for about that much work is not helping actually have diversity, and it's costing more?
So what we have here is a comprehensive study that shows that every aspect of the diversity scheme actually has the reverse effect, right? Everything you think you're accomplishing, you're not. You're demanding more and more money, not for better teachers, not for more science instruction or better mathematicians. No, to promulgate your diversity universe on college campuses. And we find out now that you're not diversifying anything, and the more money you spend, the less money the college has. So you're demanding more money from taxpayers, making it harder for kids to get in. I mean, it's a clown show. You are actually driving away and making it impossible for the people you say you care enough to go to college. And the answer, I promised you, this is going to be not changing the diversity network one bit, but growing it, and then making the argument. Only white people should have to pay for the minority kids going.
Ooh.
So what you're going to do now is you're going to double it, right? For white kids who want to go to college, for white men who want to go to college, and that's why they're not going, as we've seen today. For white men who want to go to college, you pay double tuition. For white women, you pay a tuition and a half. For purely heterosexual white people, you pay a tuition and a half. Right? And then if you're anybody else, pretty much, so you're being fed, and you're being your cost of your tuition is being offset by whitey making a huge concession here. Reparations forever.
All right. Well,
for always.
For the report, it says that the increases in the college spending to changes in the cost of attendance and the graduation rate. If colleges were spending money in ways that help students, researchers hypothesize, then there would be an increase in spending by university. It would have a proportional increase in graduation. Okay, so that would logically make sense if they're, proportional. Well, you'd be wrong at those results. What they found is that additional spending by colleges leads to only minor improvements in their graduation rates. So you're thinking, throw the money at it. I thought that's what we're always supposed to do, is throw money at it. That'll make everything better. Except you're incorrect.
Yeah, good.
They said while both public and private schools have seen modest gains in graduation rates, an increase in graduation rates of 4 percentage points for private institutions and 7 percentage points for public institutions pales in comparison to the growth in expenses. Correct.
Hint, another observation. If you really wanted to fix this problem, then you would create young minority students who are actually college ready rather than accepting ones who are not in the name of inclusion. And what you could do to start, how about forcing, at gunpoint if necessary, education departments to teach teachers how to teach reading, math, science, and history, right? Instead of teaching all of this social justice. If you were graduating teachers from college every year who knew how to go into public schools and teach minority kids reading and writing and math and science, then those kids, by the time they graduate high school, would actually be ready for college, and then not just getting accepted because, they're black or that you were socially promoting them. Then they'll have a chance, because they have a real academic background, they'll have a chance to graduate. But you're taking every minority with a pulse because you believe inclusion, even if we're talking about people who are culturally and socially illiterate, you believe that taking them is better than not taking them. And then you wonder why you can't keep them, because they're not ready for what you're trying to make them do. Instant classic is here upon us. We're talking about Johannes Vermeer, Jean Vermeer, one of the great Dutch Baroque painters, one of the great painters of Western culture ever. And yet his paintings, many of his paintings, are so focused on remarkably similar images with incredibly different possible takes and interpretations. Take a look at our painting for the day. And again, I wanted to give you a little bit more information about Vermeer. There he is on the left of this split screen. And what do we know about Vermeer? What do we know about this guy? He's very little compared. You think about, take what we know of of Rembrandt, for instance. And you could write, and people do write, tens of thousands of pages of books worth of the explanation. Vermeer is so wonderfully, for lack of a better word, so wonderfully, he's an enigma in many ways. And so he was a Dutch Baroque painter, specialized in domestic interior scenes of middle-class life. During his lifetime, he was moderately successful. He was a provincial genre painter. He was recognized in Delft and at The Hague, but he wasn't certainly a figure that was known all across the Dutch Republic, nor was he really an international painter of repute. Nonetheless, he produced and on top of that, he produced very few paintings comparatively to people like Rembrandt, and evidently, he did not live a wealthy life himself. He was not rich. He left his wife and children in debt when he died. Vermeer worked slowly and with great care and frequently used very expensive pigments, so that must have been an interesting dinner table to sit around. He is particularly renowned for his masterly treatment and his use of light in his painting. So take a look at this painting. It is The Milkmaid, if you want to use that title for it. It's an interesting, very interesting painting. The painting shows a milkmaid, or a woman, who milks cows and makes dairy products like butter and cheese in a plain room, carefully pouring milk into a squat earthenware container on a table. Milkmaids began working solely in the stables before large houses hired them to do housework, as well as the hiring out to avoid having to hire out more staff. Also on the table in front of the milkmaid are various types of bread. She is a young, very stocky, sturdily built woman wearing a crisp linen cap, a blue apron, and work sleeves pushed up from her thick forearms. A foot warmer is on the floor behind her, near Delft wall tiles depicting Cupid, to the viewer's view on the left, with a figure with a pole holding onto a pole to the right. And so it's really kind of interesting. The painting is very illusionistic, conveying not just details, but a sense of the weight of the woman and the weight of the table. Besides the really interesting use of light in the painting, look at the feel of it. Everything just feels heavy. Look at the basket hanging on the wall, which almost is so full that the gravity's beckoning it to come. Look at those breads. Eating, I mean, if you love fresh bread, look, that bread looks like it would just put 10 pounds on you. It's just incredibly dense and thick. And then you've got the milk, and you've got that incredibly roomy shawl, that beautiful cobalt blue shawl that wraps around her ample waist and hips. It all suggests weight in very many ways. One critic says there's even kind of a Mona Lisa effect, as we saw in yesterday's painting as well, in modern viewer reactions to the painting, that somehow you see in her going about her daily tasks, and there's the same enigma. When you look at the Mona Lisa, the one question you ask yourself is, what is she thinking with that enigmatic smile? You take a look at the picture of this young woman, and you see a very pensive woman who's going about her business, but you can't help but look at how tensed her forehead is. Look at how the muscular bumps on her forehead stand out. This is a woman seriously and completely thinking about something.
Those are the stories we have for you for today. If you have a question for us, please feel free to drop it into the mailbag by emailing askduke@fpeusa.org. And if you enjoy our content, please support our show by joining the Patriot Club. Your tax-deductible donation keeps us going. Simply visit patriotclub.us to get signed up. That's patriotclub.us. And as a special thank you, we will ship you the brand new American Patriot tumbler. Or maybe you could pick up 2.
And those of you who were kind enough to support the Tumbler and support the Patriot Club last year, it's a brand new year now for us fiscally. So please, we appreciate your previous donation. Let's do it all over again. Help us keep keep the show moving forward in the way that helps you and helps us. And that wraps up this show for Freedom Project. I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, stay educated and buy a tumbler, my friend.